With the Persona series being as big as it is today, it would make sense that Atlus would want to capitalize on the franchise's ever-growing popularity. Clearly, the best way to do this is to release spin-offs of the mainline Persona titles for all the fans wanting more of their ever-lovable characters. Wait, how many Persona spin-offs have there been? There was a dancing one and also a fighting game, and one that kinda went Warriors hack and slash. There's been 8 Persona spin-offs? Huh, talk about milking a franchise. Anyway, with all the spin-offs that have been released, the one that seems to be getting the most is the latest entry in the series, Persona 5. The Phantom Thieves have definitely been through a lot over the course of these spin-offs, from crossing over with the older Persona characters in Q2, to shifting game genres and beating up hordes of shadows and Persona 5 strikers. Now the Phantom Thieves move on to a new adventure with Persona 5 Tactica. Will this new spin-off entry actually steal our hearts, or is it high time for Atlus to stop with the spin-offs and look to the future of the Persona series? By the way, check out our written version of this review. The link is on the description below.
Let's go!
Okay!
Roger that.
Here I come!
Let's do this!
It's my Leave it to me!
Persona 5 Tactica takes place right when the story of the main game is starting to wrap up. The Phantom Thieves all meet up at their usual hangout hideout, LeBlanc, to get together before the next school year starts. As it is in every spin-off, they are soon suddenly transported into the metaverse, another world separate from the real world. It is here where they must once again take up the mantle of the Phantom Thieves to find a way out of this kingdom, which is this game's version of the palaces from the previous titles, and also stop any evil leader they may come across along the way. The game already assumes that you've already played through the main game and wastes no time into getting to the heart of the story. You won't be getting an introduction to the main cast and the other major characters that were introduced in the original game. Players who are thinking of picking this game up before actually playing the main title will definitely feel lost amongst all the character dynamics of each of the main cast. As for the story, it mostly boils down to the typical P5 story arc, which usually involves going through the metaverse and taking down the big bad of each respective area to achieve their goals. The world they've been transported to may be well full of danger and mystery, but knowing our ever-lovable thieves, they'll do whatever it is in their power to persevere. Along the way, they also meet 2 new allies, Erina and Toshiro. Erina is a mysterious girl fighting to free her people from the abuse of their new world's leader. Meanwhile, Toshiro Kasukabe is a politician from the real world who the Phantom Thieves had to rescue from the kingdom's prison. As players of the previous entry have already come to know all the members of the Phantom Thieves, Persona 5 Tactica's story instead focuses on these 2 new characters introduced in the game. And luckily, with all the time dedicated to getting to know them, these 2 new characters come off as well-written and are even the standouts of the story. The snarky and recklessness of Erina mixed with Toshiro's meek and passive personality make up for some very interesting character dynamics.
That's classic Toshiro right there.
Huh? And what's that supposed to mean?
As you play, the game does a good job of getting you to really care about these wonderful additions to the Persona 5 cast. Just the way they banter with the rest of the team makes them feel believable and more fleshed out.
No! This is the last thing we wanted to happen.
Your acting's even worse than Panther's, but it doesn't seem to matter. You've got this, Arena!
Seeing these new characters easily blend well with an already eccentric main cast is one of the best things about the game. It kept us hooked to find out how their adventures will unfold. Okay, now what's a Persona 5 spin-off game without its villains of the week? Just like the mainline title, the game does a great job with introducing us to the villains, usually by showing us how cruel and unlikable they are. A good way of inciting us to take them down a notch. While the villains here definitely have their own motives and aspirations, it does ultimately come down to the usual evil leader oppressing the masses they rule over. It is worth noting that the villains are unique enough to set themselves apart from the other game's cast of bad guys. And that's a pretty high bar to set, since the previous title had some memorable and over-the-top boss designs. Definitely a great story all around. You can probably tell from the title alone, but Persona 5 Tactica's gameplay is a huge departure from the mainline games. Instead of the usual JRPG turn-based style combat seen in the main game, Persona 5 Tactica instead goes for a grid-based strategy game, reminiscent of games like XCOM and Mario plus Rabbids. But to equate it to those 2 games is a bit of a disservice, as the gameplay stands out from the rest of the crowd in the tactics genre. It's very simple yet intuitive in its design, and things will start to click right after the tutorial segment. The game is divided into two phases, the player phase and the enemy phase, in which your team of 3 and the enemy takes turns in positioning in order to try to take the other out. The stages are also littered with different types of cover to help you reposition yourself throughout the map, ranging from full cover to half covers. Now, the cover system usually does a good enough job, but there were times where we felt that the placement of covers could have been a bit more intuitive. There were moments where it didn't really make much sense to have cover there, and times where it was difficult to tell whether or not the walls counts as cover. And while it may look simple at first glance, there are a lot of different mechanics to really shake things up over the course of the game. At first, you only have to rely on the simple cover system and the character skills to get past the early battles. It isn't until you get into the middle of the game that they start to introduce more enemy types, which requires you to think of strategies to tackle these newer types of enemies. This is where the more interesting mechanics like the one more system and the all-out attacks come in. Players of the main game should be familiar with some of these mechanics, as they were staples in the franchise. The one more system allowed players to gain an extra turn after getting a critical hit on an enemy, giving you another opportunity to attack. In Tactica, this will now also grant you extra movement so that you can easily reposition your character in preparation for your next turn. The way to do this is to get an enemy from out behind their cover, exposing them to a critical hit. The more enemies you can score a critical hit on in a single turn, the longer that particular turn can be extended. Be careful to take note of your position on the stage though, as the enemies also have access to this mechanic. Oh, and critical hits are also the way that you can down an enemy. Once you down an enemy, this is where the all-out attacks come in. When surrounding the enemy with your 3 party members, you're able to execute a triple threat attack, which brings all 3 of your team members to attack at once. The great thing about this special attack is that you don't only just target the downed enemy, but also any enemy caught in between, allowing for huge amounts of damage. This mechanic is invaluable as it essentially allows you to quickly take out large groups of enemies with the right positioning and strategizing. Being able to pull this off and seeing multiple enemies get caught in the triangle of death feels very satisfying, and it's one of the great parts of the game's combat. It's honestly impressive how they've managed to seamlessly mix in the battle mechanics from the mainline game with the tactics gameplay, and somehow not make it seem out of place. There are also several new ideas we don't see in the main game. For one, each of your characters have an ability called Charge. A charge happens when you end your turn without taking an action for that character. The effect of the charge varies from member to member. Some are able to increase their attack or movement speed when charged up, or, as in Erna's case, gain a unique power-up. When Erna is charged, she is able to down an enemy with her gun, even if they are behind cover. This allows her to quickly reposition or follow up with an all-out attack. It's a great mechanic that incentivizes players to sometimes wait their turn out in preparation for the next one, instead of just blindly attacking all the time.
I won't let you escape!
One major departure from the main game is that your party members are also able to equip different personas. No longer is having multiple personas a main protagonist thing. Each of the personas grants your party members some extra skills to add to their arsenal. Some personas might allow you and your party members to gain an extra movement at the start of their turn, while others increase the variety of their attacks by adding new elements to their list of powers. This is also where another returning feature comes into play, the Velvet Room. Visiting the Velvet Room gives you the option to fuse personas you currently have to obtain even stronger ones. Doing so allows you to transfer certain skills to make that persona even more powerful. Whether you have downtime between battles, you'll have plenty of things you can do to make the most out of your time. Speaking of downtime, there are also a few side activities you can do in this game while you prep for the next story battle. There is unfortunately no bond system like confidence or social links or any of the usual slice of life activities as you might expect from a Persona game. But you can revisit old story fights to obtain all the rewards in the battle, or you can talk to your party members and get their insights regarding the happenings of the story. You can also take up a few side quests to gain more experience for the members of your team. These side quests can also be quite challenging and requires a lot of thinking and strategizing. An example of a side quest is trying to find a way to defeat all the enemies in one turn. You're gonna have to use your knowledge of the mechanics of the game to find the best solution and pass these challenges. It's great to have at least more of these brain-racking puzzle-type quests, as the main story does get a bit easy once you get the mechanics of the game down. Here is where one of our complaints about the game comes in. Those looking for a challenge won't really get much here, as the game is quite easy. You technically can turn up the difficulty to hard or merciless for that extra challenge, both of which makes the enemy AI a lot smarter, as well as turning on friendly fire. These things will encourage you to think more carefully of your positioning on the map. But in the end, as long as you strategize pretty well and keep track of your placement, the game can still be a breeze to go through. Another complaint, though it's nothing too major, is that restarting a stage can sometimes be quite a chore. You'd have to go through its tutorial section every time. This can make replaying early stages a hassle, as you'd have to sit through all the things you pretty much already know. Persona 5 Tactica goes for a more chibi-ish art style rather than the more anime-looking style of the mainline games. It feels more like a middle ground between the main game and the more chibi Persona Q2 art style, which may or may not put off players of the original game. Although it is quite a departure from the mainline title, it does it exceedingly well, especially with how they were able to animate the chibi versions of the characters. The mix of chibi and anime art style sprites allow for the story to get a bit silly at times, which is something great for some of the lighthearted parts of the game. It surprisingly does not look jarring during the more serious story moments, like when they pull off a high-stakes rescue of Toshiro, but somehow are still bantering while figuring out who he is.
Joker, do you even recognize him?
Huh?
Well,
You'll also see more moments with the more adorable side of the animations. Lavenza's persona movements are cute, which creates a gap from her more serious tone, making it even cuter. And don't get us started when you fail a fusion. Nice hair, Lavenza. All in all, the art style is quite different from what people are used to, but it does help that a lot of the characters are well designed, and that it translates well into this unique art style. The standout designs are definitely for the newer characters, like Erina and Toshiro. They both look great and fit in well with the rest of the cast of characters. And we can't talk about character design without mentioning the bosses in this game. Although the game doesn't feature as many villains as the mainline title, they don't skimp out on making the few boss designs look imposing and memorable. It also does help that each of the bosses have their own battle mechanics to take into account when going up against them, really making those boss fights stand out. The visual designs of the levels were great as well, with each area of the game feeling very distinct from the other. From a ballroom in a castle to a more Japanese-looking street, every mission takes you somewhere aesthetically unique. Some levels also have stage-specific gimmicks tied to them to make replays a lot more interesting. For example, you might be required to make a character stand on a button to allow your other party members to proceed, or your stage may lock your character to the lower levels of the map with no way to reach the high ground. These moments of the game were especially enjoyable, as trying to find a way past the disadvantages felt very satisfying. And last but not least, it wouldn't be a Persona game without excellent audio. The voice performances of both Erina and Toshiro stand out amongst an already excellent cast.
Maybe try just going with the flow here?
This is far beyond the flow.
Just hearing the two of them banter is enough to make us fall in love with these new additions to the cast. And it honestly makes us a bit sad that they only appear in this spin-off title. As for the music, it's the best part of the game! The Persona games are no stranger to excellent music and voice performances, and Persona 5 Tactica definitely does not disappoint. The new music added to the game are great additions to the already amazing music catalog of the franchise.
There's no room to bargain.
Let's do it!
The battle sound effects are great too, as the sound of impact for each skill properly sounds like they pack quite a punch.
I'll cut you down. Don't move now.
From the gun sounds to the melee hits, all of them sound great and significant. And who could forget the sound of personas being summoned? Persona 5 Tactica is a great spin-off that brings its own twist to the tactics game genre. We here at GameMate are giving Persona 5 Tactica an 8 out of 10. The game does have a requirement of knowing the already established characters, but it is a must-play for players already familiar with the main game. Just seeing a continuation of the Phantom Thieves adventure is enough for fans of the franchise to try this game out. But paired with a great strategy gameplay, this title is definitely an excellent entry in the series. So what do you think about Persona 5 Tactica? Does it stand out among the already plentiful Persona spin-offs? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video. Also, be sure to check out the written version of this review linked in the description below. We'll see you guys next time.